you all to SEMRECC, the new regional dispatch facility here in southeastern Massachusetts. It's one of the projects that I tell everybody that I've worked on. I've been doing this for like 40 years, and I can tell you this is probably the most, it's one of the proudest projects because it's one because everybody seemed to work together to get to one place that we're all going to be very proud of. The results that are what you see before you, and what this used to be was an AT&T transfer station that built back in the 60s during the Department of Defense. It was built to try and use this as a transfer station for long distance calls and things of that nature. It was also built like a bunker. This was actually used, it was built in such a way that President Kennedy actually used this as a nuclear shelter in the event that he was on the Cape. They would ship him here to be protected during a nuclear attack. So it was, and when we found this place, it was just purely by chance. Our fire equipment was actually on that tower outside one day, and all of a sudden the equipment went dead, and we found out that the kids had stolen the copper off the wires, off the tower. So we actually were able to, my deputy fire chief, who was now the chief of the department, Mike Kelleher, said he talked to the guy who owned the company, this building, which was American Tower, which is on the New York Stock Exchange, pretty good company. And they said, he said, you know, what are you guys going to do with this building? He said, I don't know, you want it? And the guy said, he said, what do you mean you want it? He said, you can have it. He said, we have no use for it. So, Rob, we can tell you, without getting into too much detail, but if we were to build this building today because of the concrete in it, $550 million to build this building, just the concrete alone. So it's pretty thick, but it was obviously retrofitted to the tune of about $9 million. We renovated the whole thing entirely with state money, state 911 money. So it didn't affect each and every one of your communities. And we started out several years ago developing this whole program with the intent that the 4 original communities that are here tonight, here simply, except for my own community, I'm sorry to say, is unable to make it tonight, but I wanted to be here for this. But the situation is that we wanted to get together because all our equipment was failing on the dispatch front. And none of us were able to get the proper training that we needed to get dispatched to where it should be today. So here we are now, probably one of the best run operations in the country. We're very, very proud of the way this is running and the way Rob has sort of led the team here to where we are tonight. But the intention all along was to grow SEMRECC beyond the 4 original towns. And that's why we're here tonight, is because we're able to get the 4 towns situated, now working properly the way it should be working, and now we can grow to the point where we can actually start looking at options for including some more communities. We don't know how many communities it's going to be, but we can actually grow significantly larger than where we are today because of the extra space in the back of this room. So, a room next door. So we have the ability to expand. The state has been supporting us through State 911 Commission. There is more money being made available to cities and towns to do regionalizations like this. So we want to get ahead of that curve right now because there are other regions throughout the state, and we want to make sure that we get our share of the funding as well as the ability to expand. And I think actually this facility is probably the one in the entire group that has the greatest capability of expanding because of its current technology and capabilities. So with that said, that's sort of the groundwork for where we are tonight. I want to turn it over to Rob Radon, who's our executive director, the guy we're very, very proud that we have. He's done a terrific job of sort of putting this all together for us. He makes the life of the board of directors very simple because he does it all, and we just sort of help guide him to get us to where we are to places like tonight. So I thank you all for being here. We're really grateful for all your support. This is one of the things I had talked to the Lieutenant Governor and Governor when we talk about this project, and I say to them, so this is the one thing I've ever worked on in 40 years where everybody in the room agreed unanimously in one night as to what we should do, and here we are today. So hopefully we'll get to that same point tonight, but certainly we'll take any questions to get to the concerns you might want to have. But we've talked about this pretty extensively with the board of directors, and I think we've come to a pretty good place. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rob, and we'll get into some of the details tonight about the new amendments. Okay?
Thank you. I need the time to call this order.
Yeah, so, yes, thank you. So, the boards that are here, I trust that Mansfield, Norton, and Easton is here. So we want to make sure that you're all called to order, so we can actually function as boards.
So call order, 6:36.
Norton
Norton?
called to order, 36. And Easton called to order, 36.
Great. All right, excellent. Thank you very much. All right, here you go.
Well, welcome to SEMRECC. I'm Rob Radon, the Executive Director of the Southeast Mass 911 District. Thank you for your kind words as always, Bill. As you can see, we're in the facility that could never happen, and we're doing great work, and the industry has certainly changed exponentially over the course of time since we decided to go down this path, and to the day we went live to today. And as Bill indicated, the document that we operate under, our IMA or charter, was developed before anything was actually operationalized, so it was very conceptual. And there's a lot of legacy terms in that document and some other things that don't prohibit us from expanding, but they don't facilitate it very well. So the aim of the amendment that we're going to discuss in a little bit is to start kind of laying down that framework, or lay down that framework to allow us to expand in an efficient manner. And then just clean up some of the legacy terms. There's terms in there that technologies that don't exist anymore that we don't use. So to clean that up and make it a really durable document going into the future. But before we do that, I thought while we had the boards together that there's a lot of people that have been here since day one, some people that are newer to the select boards. And I just wanted to provide an update because we haven't been able to get in the same room for a while. So before we get into the IMA, I'd like to just provide a quick update. So just to give everyone a history of 911, just a very brief history, I'm not going to go on and on, but just to kind of understand where we are today. 911 came to Massachusetts in 1991 as just 911. It was really just a 3-digit code for somebody to dial and get into their local public safety system. It was largely put into police stations, and there's limited access to 911 because everything was tied to a landline. So if you had somebody that needed help, one person generally called, and generally went to the local police department. And that was the limit of the access. Since then, 911 has been adopted across the nation as the nationwide emergency number. We describe it as a system, so anywhere in the country you dial 911, you should be able to get help the same way, regardless. So we don't answer the phone 911, this is Southeastern Mass 911, we just answer the phone, this is 911. Because no matter where you are, what you need, we can help you. That's the same statewide and mostly nationwide. 911 is also technology. It evolves daily, and it's hard to keep up with. But we've gone from when we set out on this in Enhanced 911 or E911 to now Next Generation 911, which has totally changed the game. Enhanced 911 was the ability to take in some location data. It was purely voice traffic. There was no texting, there was no video. It was designed for a copper-based landline system. And if we look at our system today, 90% of our calls are coming from cell phones. 90%. That means that people are moving when they're calling 911. They're driving 80 miles per hour when they're calling 911. They are 12-year-olds on soccer fields when they're calling 911, and they're not tied to a specific location. That changes the way we operate. There's a tremendous, there's a lot more access to 911 as well. You don't have to be in a building. You don't have to be the only person using a phone in a building to call 911. We could all call 911 right now, and it'll all ring into our center. When we first set out on this, that might not have been the case. It certainly wasn't the case in 1991 when 911 was brought to Massachusetts. And 911 is a profession. Our staff is held to extraordinary standards. There's a standard of care, there's a scope of practice. We train to incredible standards, and we're held to incredible standards. We have a tremendous quality assurance program, a tremendous quality improvement program, and a continuing education program. Before someone even starts out by themselves in this operation, they have upwards of 5 certification programs they have to go through, and 300 to 500 hours of additional training beyond that, on-the-job training. It takes about 6 months. It's a tremendous investment, both staff and money, and the person that does it, and then they set out on a career that's both fruitful but very challenging. You're dealing with people's best days and a lot of times their worst days. Oh, I had all the slides I could have leaned on. So 911 has evolved. From 911 to Enhanced 911, like I said, E911 is dead. There's no more E911 in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a fully next generation 911 state, one of the first in the country and one of the only in the country still. What that means is that it's IP based, it's built on a network. The capabilities of our center to actually receive calls and determine people's locations and to receive rich data is exponentially increased over the E911 days. There's no more, this tying up the 911 line, we could take 1 million calls in here without blinking an eye. As far as the system goes, we're not on staff that, but there's no more of that. It's also very smart, so we have loading standards on the center, so we've never rolled a call, so any call that's ever rang in our center has been answered by our staff. But in the case of a surge operation or catastrophic emergency, the system's smart enough to know that either we've let it ring too many times, or also our alternate, which is fully redundant, it's in Duxbury, or it sees, hey, we have 10 positions in the center. 10 people just answered 10 calls, and they've been on the call for less than X amount of seconds. There's no reasonable expectation that anyone's going to answer that call, so it rolls automatically to Duxbury. The other enhancement with Next Generation 911 is obviously the location data. Cell phones being the biggest call volume we have, it's able to handle that and give us really great data as far as location space. And we're also able to transfer calls around the state seamlessly. So if we transfer a call into our partner, the MEC in Norfolk, they're able to get all the data we received initially, and it's seamless. Nothing changes as far as calls, just handed off. Recently, I've been notified, we haven't had the chance to test it, but that us and Rhode Island have also tied our 911 systems together. So we're able to seamlessly transfer calls back between the states.
Robert, as we prepare for 988, is there going to be any kind of, is this affects your group at all, or that becomes mandated?
Sure, so 988, for anyone's not aware, 988 is the new 3-digit emergency number that will be part of the suicide mental health crisis hotline. So instead of dialing the green card 1-800 number, 988 will be available nationwide. It's mandated mid-July, so a couple weeks from now. It does not affect the PSAPs. It's not something that we're obligated to take on. The state of Massachusetts has elected to deploy it as a statewide system. And basically the SeMRECC group that runs the suicide hotline centers now will be augmented to take on the 988 traffic and route it. So federally, there's a law that says you have to do it. There's still legislation pending at the state level that says how we do it and how they derive funds. We can get into that if you wanted to, but the legislation has some issues and it's kind of embattled right now. There's some issues with the funding mechanisms and the composition of boards, or not issues, but there's some challenges on both sides of the issue. But 988 will go live in July. How it actually matures and develops into the future is kind of subject to how that law actually winds up on the other side. But as far as our interaction with 988, the intent of the state right now, as far as we can tell, the Department of Public Health is administering 988, is that they're going to come up with policies and protocols of how the two systems interact. So 911 into 988 and 988 back into 911. So sight unseen right now, but something that's developing. It's happening very quickly too. So.
Yeah.
But luckily it's not, the suicide hotline centers are not new. The concept is not new. It's just easier access. All right, so I have to brag, I actually threw this in today. We had a really cool use case of our system and how well it works. So we had a house in Easton today that caught fire. I like animations, right?
It actually looks like the real house.
I just saw pictures of it. Impressed. So somebody called 911, it rang into our center. We dispatched Easton Fire Department. Fire obviously gets worse as time goes on. That's one of the things we always are battling against is emergencies generally don't get better as time goes on unless you wait really long and then they just get resolved and stuff. But we don't like to get to that point. So obviously fires and things get worse as time goes on. Not necessarily this fire, I had no context as to how this fire progressed or not. But in general, that's how it works. So on a routine, normal PSAP deployment, a single town, if that call came in, that fire department is going. In our center, because we have oversight over 4 agencies plus the entire county, Bristol County Control, we were able to send a full working fire assignment to the initial call based on the training experience of our staff, so that even before the officer in charge got there, the reports we were giving, he put what's called a working fire assignment on. So that's when we call them mutual aid. So as a result of our policies, programs, and training, before he even got there, before he even called for the working fire, we had all those other towns moving, which saved 4, 5, 6 minutes for a fire that was progressing pretty rapidly that went to a second alarm. If we didn't do that, we could certainly assert that second alarm fire could have gone to a 4th or 5th, where somebody could have got hurt because of that 4 or 5 minutes that would have been would have been delayed as we called for those mutual aid assets. So instead of dispatching the call waiting, somebody getting on the scene saying, hey, this is a big fire, we need help, on the initial dispatch, we sent that help appropriately to a fire, and I just say for certain that it helped mitigate it.
Is that the same story like in Plainville the other day, if they're not part of this group, that big fire, is that the same kind of, you're in contact with people that are not part of the group?
Yeah, so Plainville's under the MEC, another regional center, so they have,
Our guys were there.
Yeah, just so it's important.
they have very similar capabilities. The other neat thing is that between us and MEC, we built an intercom. SEMRECC built it, so instead of the same, like if we interacted with Walpole's over the radio or phone, you have to say, hey, Walpole, do you have an engine available? And they say, oh, let me check. No, we don't have an engine available. And that takes time. We have to move down to the next thing if it's not. We have 10 towns connected, so we can just, hey, Mac, I need 3 engines and 2 ambulances, and it just happens. So even the regional to regional interface just greatly enhances that efficiency. Just a little glimpse into the call volume from when we started to today. So in 2017, the call volume, this is the call volume for that year, January to January. So about 3,000 each community for 911 call volume. And that's what we were anticipating, that's what was provided for us historically. That was one of the highest years in historical look back. For some a glimpse into what we're dealing with now, because of wireless and just the way we handle calls, we take wireless calls directly now too. Easton's 3,800 calls from 2017. From January to today, we've taken 4,900 calls. So more than the complete year in less than half the year. And we're seeing that across the board. We have a tremendous increase in call volume. Again, there's more access to 911, more people have cell phones, more people we're telling people to call 911 more often.
Is that including hangouts?
It does. Yeah, so last year we took about 2,200 hangups. And that doesn't include the callbacks. So.
January through June.
So we've
They had
taken.
an Xfinity a lot. It's an idiot in the parking lot.
Yeah, it happens all over the place. And if you think about it, we're not even taking 911 calls from cell phones anymore. We got a tremendous influx of 911 hang-up calls from the campgrounds because kids are wearing iWatches that dial 911 if you hit the side button too many times. So if you're riding a bike, all of a sudden your watch is calling 911. So the amount of emergencies didn't necessarily increase, but the amount of people calling and the saturation into the PSAPs has increased significantly. This does not include 911 text or videos or anything like that. It's just purely voice calls. This is the distribution of our 911 call volume over the last full calendar year. So we took 58,000 911 calls, almost 60,000 911 calls. And that's how they were distributed across the district. And we took 2,000 abandoned calls or hang-ups.
And the average ring time was 3 seconds?
3 seconds.
Wow.
We've been keeping it there. Actually, we're pretty well. Pat, I'll introduce my staff. What's our average answer time right now?
Average answer time is under 2.5 seconds.
Yeah, so we're quick. Yeah. So I'm sorry, to just introduce my staff. Pat Feeney is our operations section chief. Lindsay Mitchell, our training section chief. Eric Berg is the deputy director. He is on vacation. I don't know if I stuff up. So just to go into performance, we talked about the ring time. Critical incidents, so that's our high acuity calls, our fires, our cardiac arrests, are really life-threatening calls. We're averaging 26-second dispatch times. We have 60 seconds as per the national standard, but we're doing it in 26 seconds. We've achieved ISO Class 1 for our Foxborough Fire. That's the first ISO rating exam that we've gone through with the departments, and they achieved Class 1. They're one of a small margin of departments in the entire country that's achieved Class 1. And 10% of that total assessment is based off of our operation, and we got all the points, which is tremendous. Just to brag a little bit, this kind of ugly looking chart, the blue lines are called taking metrics for indications of a pathogenic infection, not necessarily COVID at the time, but before COVID. If you see the blue spike here, it was April 2020 before we even really knew what COVID was. Our data was showing that there's something that's out there that's causing fever and coughs. And then the green line is the actual testing that started paralleling that. which you can see matches our call taking processes very closely. So to put those on top of each other, we kind of were like, whoa, it worked. But tremendous amount of data, and that's just a small glimpse into the amount of data we're taking and starting to analyze and making actual representations of those data points. We had a similar example after we had a spike in seizures across the district, and it was also at the same time that we were spraying for mosquitoes. So we knew both things, we correlated them, and we gave it to the public health officials. They were able to determine that it was not related, but just two things were like, wow, if that was, there would have been very little insight to that happening. But we were able to correlate it. They weren't, causing with each other, but some cool data were able to do.
Robert, are you sharing any of that with Board of Health or health agencies within the towns?
Yep, so every community, every Board of Health, every health agent has access to our dashboards for this. And then when we see those anomalies that we don't necessarily chart like this on a daily basis, we notify. We have alerts for different anomalies. So when we set out, the mission was kind of very clear: answer 911 calls to dispatch, police and fire departments. Where we've taken that is light years ahead of kind of our initial charge, where we're hosting the CAD and RMS systems, we're doing analytics, we have advanced automated station alerting, we're doing the advanced emergency medical dispatch and advanced emergency fire dispatch, and a ton of other stuff that's really just, we couldn't have even conceptualized when we first went live, and through the hard work of the staff and the training and education and the availability from the state for funding, we've been able to do what we were set out to do, improve on it, meet standards, set new standards, and then just continue to amplify our ability to provide good service to the public. So this might be redundant for some people, but just to kind of talk about the building project. Like Bill said, this was a big, ugly concrete bunker in the middle of the woods. It was disgusting. We bought it for $10, and then we went to work. The day we went shoveling the ground, 3 months passed, COVID hit, and everything shut down. We still got the project done on time, under budget. It was done in 300 days from shoveling the ground. We had a 3-month advance on the project. We were 3 months ahead of schedule, and then COVID hit. We lost the 3 months. We still got it done on time. So these are just some pictures. So the room we're sitting in now is the room on the left. Same perspective.
The outside was completely covered with graffiti.
It was gross.
There's not an angle of the building where we could show publicly that's
There was no blacktop out there. It was,
It was pretty ugly.
grants, this comes up a lot, and a lot of people are curious about how the grants work. So this is a slide I built initially when we were talking pre-go live in 2017 at some point in Mansfield that presented this. And it was just a look into what we're expecting grant-wise. The communities together cumulatively pulling in $190,000 in grant money for 911. Our anticipated go live grant funding for the same grant program was $890,000. That turned into $1.3 million, which represents now a grant, abandoned grant revenue of $13 million over the period of 10 years. So if the communities did regionalize, it would have been $13 million. It just wasn't available to the communities. It was still taken in by the state and just was distributed amongst other communities. So tremendous value there as far as grants go. Just another topic that comes up all the time, the grants. Everyone always asks, not everyone, but often asks, what happens when the grants dry up? The grants program that fund this is not a traditional grant program. It's not tax derived. It's based off of a surcharge on any telephone line. So the amount of telephone lines has not decreased, it's increased a ton. So every iWatch has a surcharge, every cell phone has a surcharge, every landline has a surcharge. And all that money is federally protected. It goes into a trust fund, which is for the exclusive use of provisioning 911. So it's protected by law. It's a very healthy fund, and the amount of PSAPs or 911 centers is decreasing. The amount of funding is actually increasing to the point where they're actually looking at decreasing the surcharge to make sure there's not over surplus. I told them that I would be happy to spend the money for them if there's surplus. They didn't do that.
will you be able to afford a sign for up front so we know where we're going?
Gotta move down the road a bit. That road is on our hit list for our capital projects, unfortunately. It's
I almost went by it, but I was going 110.
Yeah. Should've gone 100.
We don't want to put another billboard out there, I can tell you that. That's enough.
Some of the issues we have been rubbing up against is our CAD system, our computer dispatch system. When we went live and when we started implementing, that program we have today was really the best available. Anything that was better than that was so unaffordable that it cost more than the building to actually purchase and utilize. That has changed. The technology has matured a ton over the past 5 years. But the amount of data that we're now ingesting and required to manipulate and store and take action on is not compatible with our old systems. We constantly run into issues with that. This is seen across the state. Our other regional partners are seeing the same issues where the typo?
The amount. Rob, that's
I
good.
appreciate it. I should have said to you before.
We'll talk to you later.
So the amount of data that we are using, that we're manipulating, that we need to take action on is increased, and our systems are just not able to actually do that. So we have a lot of bolt-on systems, we have a lot of data that just doesn't get processed in the way it's supposed to be processed. And then we're trying to fit new requirements into the legacy system. So like every interaction with police, we are tracking race and ethnicity and sex and gender and time of stop, results of stop. Our systems do not have the capability of actually taking that data in, so we're forcing it into, like, we're making it work, but not in a way that's very efficient. 80 to 90% of our calls are wireless, which means they're very geographically diverse and very geographically dynamic. Our systems don't have mapping tools that can actually ingest that data and take action on it. So here's the catch. The system costs about $3 million to replace, and it's about a 1.5 year process to do it. This is not just to kind of sweat any fears. This is not me saying, hey, we need to buy $3 million CAD. I'm here to ask you for it. That's not it at all. What we're trying to do is, what we've pitched to the state is that every regional center in the Commonwealth is running up against us, and that if we need to spend $3 million for us, and our partner Duxbury needs to spend $3 million, if we do it together, it'll probably cost $3 million together instead of $6 million. And if Westcom out in Chicopee needs to do the same thing, it probably costs us $4 million. So we've put in for grant funding for this as a partnership with Duxbury as a pilot to start that process to get us all into the same system. So we have data interoperability, we have disaster recovery capabilities, we can cross-train our staff, we can start having consistent training across the state, and the data that we have is more efficient and durable, and we can get into these premier systems without spending a ton of money. On top of that, we've asked them to pay for the entire thing, which they seem very, actually, it looks like it might actually happen, so that's a great process.
Rob, how often are you acid testing? You know, if everything shuts down, like how often are you testing the systems to see, you pushing it to the limits to see if they shut down, how it works?
Yeah, so everything in this building was designed to be redundant, to surrounding disaster recovery and staying operational. Our CAD systems, they're so old and antiquated that they don't have the capacity to have a backup. So if it shuts down, it's a scramble to get it back up. We have methods and policies to bridge that gap, but it's always a huge challenge, and it's always very kind of unsettling when our systems go down. It's tremendous operational impact there. Our staff does great. We drill on those kinds of issues as well as bigger disasters, and our concrete plan is tested. We try and do it twice a year. 3 months ago, we shut down every system in this building down to battery power, and we transferred our stuff to Duxbury and went through the whole process of that, and it was seamless. It was absolutely seamless. This facility has backup batteries, backup generators, backup water, backup internet, satellite. Obviously, it's pretty hardy, so that's pretty good too. But one of our tenets of operation is that there's no downtime, there's no close time we can flip and just, all right, we'll figure it out tomorrow. It's uptime 100% of the time. So before we get into that, any questions on our how we got here in operations? So expansion, as Bill talked about, expansion is kind of one of our duties. The state is pushing regionalization because the local PSAPs generally cannot keep up with the demands of today. just like the four communities saw, and if we rewound and applied today's demand on public safety into those centers, I would say that they probably wouldn't fare too well. This entire facility was built to grow. We have expansion capacity inside the actual operations center today, and then we have set aside space so that we can expand efficiently. On the other side, we're a government body just like anyone else, and our budget will increase, our cost will increase. If we looked at just fuel prices, our projections would be all over the place. So taking a glimpse into the future, not accounting for today's fuel and labor costs, but generally looking at it as a conventional trend, we will see an increase over time. If we expand, we control those costs and we dilute them to the individual communities. The costs still go up, but it's diluted across the multiple communities and it becomes less expensive for the individual communities. If we don't, we kind of remain static. Our staffing costs go up, our fuel costs go up, our insurance costs go up, and then it'll just slowly, start going up. Not the end of the world by any means, but there's an opportunity here to expand, to have access to more resources, to more grant funding, and obviously dilute between the various communities. This is where we sit right now, inside of Southeast Mass. Anything that's colored is part of a regional center. The different colors are different regional centers. So it's not like we have all of Massachusetts that's unaccounted for. There is a small window to have communities join our center. Not that we're soliciting communities or out, doing the salesman thing, but it's just if we wait 10 years, hey, we'll wait 10 years to expand, there could be no communities to expand with. And the regionalization effort could have, passed us by. There's still a tremendous amount of potential down into Bristol County and up into Norfolk County, even a little bit to Plymouth County, but we're not the only players in the field here. So that's my spiel as far as that goes. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer. If not, Mr. Chair, if you want to get to the amendment.
What's our capacity? So I know that you said we could add towns. What are we at right now, number-wise, for capacity versus what we could actually do?
Sure. So the building capacity and the administrative capacity of the district is really unlimited. It really comes down to the culture of towns that we're looking to join. If there's a huge cultural difference between how we operate and how they want to operate, maybe they're not compatible with us, and political issues as well. That's really the limit of it, and then ensuring that the state has the funding to support it, so it doesn't become a cost to the communities to expand. And right now, every indication is that as we expand, if the funding model continues and the development grant, which is competitive, continues the way it is, that it will continue to be a good deal for the communities that are in. There may be an operational tipping point where we say, all right, we're done. We've maxed out our efficiency. But that's kind of sight unseen right now. But every community that we've talked to, even just to say, hey, here's a tour, we've looked at for operational, how they operate, if they're willing to change their culture, their operational burden, and then looking at what is the actual funding revenue look like from the state to make sure that it's not a cost to any communities and it's not a cost operation. So to answer your question, there's really no limit in this facility for Massachusetts. Obviously, many towns are spoken for already, but there's tremendous opportunity here.
I'm looking around the room, probably half the people weren't around when this all started. Has everybody been around the tour and see? Because there's another whole room. Correct me wrong. There's empty pods here, but then there's also another whole room behind that wall where they could expand more. So I think if you saw that, you would get a feel that there is physical space.
There's a lot of room.
Yeah. So I'm sorry.
Be happy to give voice afterwards.
But I think if they understand that, there's physically room to put more pods in.
We built this facility looking at other recs and said, hey, what's your biggest cost post-go live? And everyone was saying, I want to add a town, it's going to cost me $3 million because I have to knock this down and rebuild it because I built it to suit today. We built a lot of mothballed space in, so it's here, the building was built. It's not like we're going to knock much of this down. We did knock a portion of the building down, but the way we designed it so that we can iterate into the space behind us, not as real operations. We can build it up and just keep going.
I have a question. What is the growth opportunity if you don't upgrade the systems? Is there kind of, a tie-in to that we can only go to some point without the upgrade of the systems?
Yeah, that's a tremendous barrier to us taking on more communities, is that right now the systems are kind of, they are maxed out. Every day we seem to max out the system at some point, and to take on another community would be I don't think it would be in the best interest of either to say, hey, we're going to add another community into this already, full boat, if you will. The state, I think, has recognized that. Operationally, we've recognized that. The other regional directors have been strong advocates saying we're past due on this. So I don't think that's going to be a barrier for long, but you're 100% right, where that's something that we're looking at. Luckily, we're at a really great point where if we're successful and we get the award in July for the grant project, for the CAD project, it takes about 12 to 18 months to deploy CAD. It takes about 12 to 18 months to bring on a new community. So like if we took on a community about the same point, instead of converting them into our system and then saying, oh, we got to convert you again, if we could just line them up, it'd be very efficient and almost perfect timing. I don't jinx us, but there's a huge opportunity to do that.
So at this point, what I'd like to do is just, we'll go walk through, do you want to go ahead and walk through the amendments, Rob, for all of us? But some of the key points here was that we talked about was that if we grow beyond where we are today, one of the key elements was, what level of control do we relinquish by growing? And that was a big concern to us as the 4 regional communities, and my colleagues on the board, Kevin and Mike, and Mike, actually Connor, was serving in that role as well. And we'll all talk about this at length because we think it's really important that we retain that level of control over the process because, let's face it, we were the ones that grew this from where it is today. So as in an effort to address that, we wrote it up in such a way that the 4 original members will always have a seat at the board, on the board. We also talked about the fact that how big should the board be, because you don't want the board to be so big that it's unruly. So I know you all struggle with that, I'm sure, at times, with your own boards. And the bigger they get, the more difficult it can be at times. So what we looked at was maybe looking at a board that was shaped like a board number 7 in it, which would mean that the 4 of us would maintain the 4 seats, and then the next two that came on would retain a seat. But then the 7th one would be a rolling seat. So in other words, every year that position would be up for election amongst the other members, and as such, that position could change until for a period of time as long as the board is in existence. The concern, of course, will be once we get past 7, or 8 or 9 or 10, I'm sure there'll be communities that want to say, hey, look, I want to see the board, I'm not going to do this. And that's going to be a challenge they're going to have to figure out, because at some point, they're going to be at a point where they're going to have to join a regional center, because the reality is that that's where the entire state is going. So, however, that was a position that we felt would be comfortable. I think it would be respected of all of your positions in your communities, because you got behind this originally, and we want to retain that level of control in that regard. So, I think that was one of the biggest things. I think, just don't forget, a lot of this was built with state money. So in terms of us, participating in keeping and making a contribution to it, all of us effectively achieved a savings by joining this. But it was paid primarily through through State 911. So if we had not done it at the time, all of us would have incurred some significant costs in the 7-figure number range to build to buy new equipment. And it would be completely inefficient based upon what Rob just described with the CAD system. I mean, it makes better sense that we all work towards acquiring equipment together and paying one price as opposed to multiple prices. So I think those are things that really weighed on our thinking on this. And I think was really one of the major pieces. The other changes that were made were more cleaning up the language. That was, as Rob pointed out, there was a number of things that we didn't think about when we first put the first document together. And so we'll kind of get through those pretty quickly. But that was the key. The key one was, what's the board going to look like and who's going to have the control? And the answer is all of you and all of us are going to retain that control. Go ahead.
So if there's 4 original members and then potentially 3, what helped you come to the decision that the next 2 would get a permanent seat and only the last one would be flexible versus we're going to keep all 4 and those other 3 were up for, appointment or?
Well, I think that was just the position that we reached because it seemed reasonably and it was relatively easy to change. But, there's nothing to say that we couldn't look at rotating those last 3 seats.
So there could be 10 other towns. And
It could be 10
they can
other
all go
towns,
in the
but,
pool and whoever wins, right?
right, but I do think that, don't forget that the ones that are looking at us right now are ones that want those seats as well because they're gonna be like us, they're gonna be like the first few in, and they're gonna wanna have that level of control too.
Yeah, but when you say the first few in, I feel as, somebody who sat in that first meeting, it's all fun and games when you're cutting the ribbons and everything
Yeah.
came out great and everything works better than you expected, it's
Right.
less expensive, it's on time. We took a big risk when we were voting that,
Sure
everybody
did.
who did that, and all our public, public safety people took big risks doing that as well. So that's got to count for something. I think
Right.
anybody wants to join it when it's winning, right? So,
Oh, no question,
you
no
know,
question.
if-
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just as as another member of the board, that we felt very strongly that people who first start to sign up and to join, they're gonna have the most in the race. And we're also very concerned about the type of municipality. Rob had stated the fact that it's gotta work with the philosophy of SEMRECC. And that what we're hearing from those municipalities who are really interested in joining at some point in the future, it was really important for them to have a seat, but also led to the board's discussion about what we felt was manageable. And even if it ended up maxing out at 7, and it was just 7, we still have a greater benefit to the entire region, but we know that at some point it can't grow forever. So that we felt that the position that we came to and kind of vetting it out to where we are, the timing, it doesn't mean that we couldn't always come back as a group with the municipalities and have a future discussion, but just for the management of the board and what we felt comfortable and to protect what we'll call the founding communities, that we felt that this was the best option that we wanted to bring forth for discussion for tonight.
I have another follow-up thought too on your point, but go ahead, Judge.
Just to follow up with the lady from Easton, right?
Dottie.
I understand the fact that, to bring on more communities, it'll help spread the cost out, and I get that, but the only thing that I was around in the beginning, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people hours put in by our town managers, our police chiefs, our fire chiefs, and all their staff, and, like I said, there was a lot of risk taken, a lot of just, blood, sweat, and tears. I didn't think Rob would ever pull it off, but he did. No, and I've said, but I think there's got to be some type of something from these communities, like a buy-in or something, just to make it, some type of equity, to reimburse the towns or something. I mean, maybe I'm off base, but just letting them walk in, because we have a great thing here.
Yeah, we wrestle with that same question.
I have a little bit of a problem with that.
We wrestle with that too, just but the challenge is that most of this is paid for state money.
Yeah, but there's a lot of
I know
time and effort that was put in there.
no question about that, but I do think that we all clearly benefited by doing this.
I'm not disagreeing with it.
Yeah, so
I'm just throwing it out there, so my
Yeah,
colleagues can hear what I have to say.
Fair, so I think the other, getting back to Dottie's point too, is that I do think that, don't forget that this isn't the only regional center right now, so we have to be competitive too, and we have to make it, attractive for these communities to join us, especially for the next few that go. Now, after that, it's going to be very easy because we're going to have the infrastructure in place to just take them on relatively easy. That's why I don't think they need to have as much say at the board level. Everybody will have the say at the budgets, as far as the budget process goes, because each committee will have a seat when it comes to the funding piece. But as far as being, the policy-making board, this is the one that, we wrestled with this a lot, but we came to that conclusion based on the fact that we really want to make sure we're competitive to get people attractive enough for people to come and join us, because we are competing with, 3 or 4 other regions right now to get people in. So that was a major consideration.
You know, I agree with Donnie, I was here in the beginning, we got 4 towns to agree to something, like you said, that there's, never really happens. And, you know, a lot of hard work was done by everybody, and I understand where Jess is coming from, and I kind of agree, but on the other hand, I see that, you know, the more people that we get in, the more opportunities we're gonna have for a grant, because I think the larger your regional dispatch is.
No, I agree with all.
But I think the most important thing to me is that the 4 who stuck their necks out saved that power.
Right.
And
And we agree.
this allows that, so.
We agree with that.
Like you said, you know, 10 years down the line, if another group of people was sitting around the table, I'll still be here. I won't. Not really.
God bless you.
He's definitely not going to be here. You know, if they want to change it in the future, but, I mean, to me, 7's a manageable number. 4 keeps our power that, you know, the original communities who put their necks out.
Yeah, you're all pioneers in this regard, so, I mean, we were pioneers back then, we're pioneers now. And 10 years from now, there's going to be another group of
There was so
pioneers.
many meetings,
Oh, yeah. There's a lot
and
of
15 people at meetings, every chief, and 5, I mean, it was
studies and everything else that went.
But also, there was a lot of heartache with the transition for
Oh, sure.
the dispatch workers, and some towns,
Right,
you
you
know, I
lost
know
the
that
people
we
didn't
took,
come
it
here.
was really hard for
Very hard,
us.
very hard.
For the new people, the dispatchers that were in the towns didn't necessarily get a job here.
Right.
It was a whole job process, right?
So they were, those same towns that are going to join us are also going to go through that, so.
Right.
So, because they're going to have those same challenges coming out of the gate, so. So other questions or comments, I don't want to.
Did the board consider options with different terms for the 3 seats that aren't the core founding members and using that as an incentive for the next 2 rather than the?
There were, so the first, originally it was a, no change to the board, 4-member board, the original towns retained full authority. Just talking with the various communities that were looking to join, it was like Mr. Dumas said, strongly communicated to us that those woes and those challenges and those hard conversations, if there was no ability to have any perspective of sitting on the board, that it was perhaps tipping the scales towards just staying on their own or going with another center. So in order to stay competitive, we said, or the board really kind of, we had 5-6 meetings about it.
Yeah.
Talking about, you know, all right, well, what's manageable? Do we expand how much? And then the 2 seats kind of evolved out of that. And then the next conversation was, okay, what about the next community or the 30th community if we get that far? And that's where the 7th seat came in, where it's dynamic and it's elected, where you're not completely boxed out of having a seat on this board. And if you're the proactive person who's, you know, kind of wanting to get on the board, you can campaign for it, or somebody can just be elected annually and or stay on it more permanently if that's the person. Again, every community would have 2 votes on the finance subcommittee, so they'd have budgetary oversight and a voice there. But as far as the board of directors, that's how we got to that point. Also important to note, the amendment restricts officers of the board to the 4 charter communities, so the 4 regional communities can only be the vice president, president, and clerk. So even the 3 new members, if that was approved, cannot serve as those positions.
Which I like.
So my only concern is the voting for the 7th member. I'm personally against voting. Obviously, if there's only 1 person voting, if there's only 1 7th board, of course they're going to be elected or whatever. I would prefer a rotating seat. Did you guys discuss that idea? Rather, if there's 10. So that means there's 3, and it's based on when you were established as a part of this, and then rotated each year to the next committee or the next town community, then the next town the year after that. And then it could be something where, due to obligations, they might not be able to serve fully for that year. They have an option in the charter to decline, and it moves to the next group rather than voting. I just get concerned with voting and priorities and things like that, all the politics behind it, where I don't believe this should be politics. That's what I believe.
So that was actually, it was discussed, and as much as we got feedback that we want a voice on the board, we did get some feedback saying I really don't have time to serve, and we just don't want to be in this business anymore. So there's actually pretty strong communication from other communities saying, I don't want another thing, and I'm not right for your board. So, and the ability to deflate the political nature of a board by limiting the amount of people on it is why it wasn't a one community, one vote, one seat. It was limited to 7, to say, you know, if you have 13 members on the board, 15 members, all of a sudden every community's thing becomes a thing that's represented and communicated and kind of influencing our board, and that could catch fire, or, you know, it could influence the board either way. And this, like I agree with you, is too risky of a mission, it's too high stakes, and it's too neutral to politicize. So those things what's up.
Thanks for that thought. Anybody else? You want to just run through the,
Sure.
you know, so quick, and then we'll,
So just to recap, the intent of the amendment is to modernize and conform language to the current statutes and current philosophies, and kind of make it neutral and agnostic to technology. Enable processes for adding new communities. Right now, there is no process. It would be, every time we add a community, it would be a very large meeting, and as we add communities, that meeting would get larger and larger, which would be unmanageable, we thought. And to define how that board of directors grow, which we had a discussion on. Assessments, we talked through 1,000 different scenarios about formulas, basing on population and call volume, and every time we applied a formula to a different community, a Taunton versus a Millis versus a Norwood, the formula broke, and it was unfair in some regard. So instead of saying we're going to stick to a formula, we really just captured what we're trying to do is kind of conceptualize the true impact to the district cost-wise against what they're bringing in grant revenue, and derive their assessment based on that. And also memorializing that the current 4 communities that pay equal splits right now will continue to pay equal splits into the future.
And just one more thing, and you highlighted this in the packet that was sent out and then the agenda, but that the full cost of the burden coming into SEMRECC would be borne by that municipality that would be joining, and not on the current existing members of SEMRECC.
Which is all grant eligible, should be no issue, but if anything was not grant eligible, that ensure that we're protected against having a bill for bringing on a community.
But capital cost would be split in a more equitable way.
So, recurring capital costs?
Well, for instance, if we had to, we're not going to just do one software upgrade and that's it, right? So over the years, we'll need more software upgrades. New communities coming in would have to
It's
take
kind
some
of what
of
we're
that.
facing now, where we've kind of run the course of the current software, where if we want to expand, we really need to upgrade it. And that really is the key to us replacing what we need today. Bringing on a community says, hey, we're expanding state 9-1, this is eligible for grant funding, and they've so far supported it. When I see the check, I'll actually say they supported it, but that really is the goal, is for those instances specifically, when we go up to those competitive grants saying, we're expanding by X amount of communities, and we need X, Y, Z, both for our legacy operation and our future operation, that those things are paid for and kind of self-resolve.
Okay, great.
Admission, there's a procedure in there for admission of new districts. So this is another thing we spent a lot of time discussing, going through different scenarios. Initially, it was the board of directors that would say yea or nay, and then we, through some discussion, that there was communicated that there's some boards that the communities do have an opportunity to provide their feedback. So we found the middle ground where the board of directors would elect to recommend a community for joining after studies or whatever due process and whatever we need to kind of see if they're worth bringing on. The board would recommend or not recommend a community. At that point, there would be notice provided to the communities that we're going to hold basically an admissions meeting. And each community can either join as a full board, like a delegate, or not participate at all. And that meeting would vote yea or nay to admit the new community. So we thought that struck a healthy balance between the two. Same thing. The other provision of that is the sitting board members could be authorized as the delegate. So if X community sat on the board and the select board of the council elected or decided that they wanted to appoint that board member as the delegate, they would have 2 votes. And that is, okay, all right. Those are really the big updates to the amendment. There are some language changes, there's some provisions. The 2 other big ones I just wanted to touch on, for some reason, PowerPoint's not progressing through, is one is for special events, just to make sure that a community is notifying us of special event permits, so that we are aware of if, let's say, New Bedford joins the district and they have their waterfront festival, that they just don't do it, and all of a sudden we're getting thousands of live calls, that they have a notification process, and that we have the opportunity to plan with them. And the other one is the requirement to comply with the addressing standards. If a new community comes on board and they fail to comply with the addressing standards, that actually jeopardizes all of our grant funding. The grant funding for the district is tied to compliance with the addressing standards, because that is what really operates the Iowa systems good addressing. So just putting that in there as protection, that a community shall comply with the addressing standards, which really is, how you number new streets and how you report to the state. It's a very low bar to set. Sir?
Just another thing too, I remember when it first started, every fire department might do things a little different. So like maybe Foxborough handles their logs one way, and so that all has to be tied together too, because City X might do things way differently, but the 4 towns in here now have worked it out where there's a protocol that, and that's the way it's going to be, and if they don't like it, then it's not going to work out.
Yeah, and that is incorporated in the current grant. We did make some modifications to it, because it had police and fire operations plan. We changed it to public safety to make sure we tie in the investor or service.
You definitely included.
That is really the core of the amendments. I'd be happy to answer any questions on those as well.
And you're looking for each board to make a vote this evening, is that correct?
So to explain the amendment process as laid out today, the board of directors considers an amendment and they approve it or not approve it. Once they approve it, it goes to the member communities for approval or denial. So the board of directors has approved the draft in front of you, and now 2/3 approval, I guess, of the member communities would make it part of the formal
So
vote.
it means it's one vote. No. So we have to have a discussion. Each town.
Or somebody can just make a motion.
I'll move to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll move to approve.
Do I have a second?
For Norton.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So moved for Mansfield.
Do you have a second?
Yes.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
For Easton, before we vote, I just wanted to pick up one language thing in here. You used the reference of boards of selectmen in one instance in the beginning, but then in other areas you say boards of selectmen, select board, and council. Just for consistency, I think it should show 3 all in the same place. And select board for Mansfield, Easton, and Norton, it's 2 words with capital letters. I know that's picky, but...
The next motion on the agenda is to allow us to go through all that language.
Oh, great.
Any clerical changes.
We haven't adopted select board yet.
It would be easier if you
We're
guys just adopted.
We're working on that. We're a little slow to the draw on that, but sorry about that. Yeah, we're going to do some corrections. It's tough this year.
All right, can we get a motion?
moved.
Second. Bodger and Stebbins, all in favor?
Thank you all very much. So that's, we were very grateful for all your attention tonight. Does anybody want to see the facility tonight while you're here? I think it's a great thing to actually witness and see all the different pieces to it. It's a great facility. I'm sure you'll find it very, very helpful.
Do you have a few? So the next agenda item is for the district board, the SEMRECC board, to consider authorizing the amendments to be incorporated into an amended and restated agreement. So basically taking our first amendment, which fixed some issues before we went live, and this now second amendment, taking everything, putting it into one whole document for distribution, so that we're not trying to reference amendments as we try and go through this in 2 years.
So moved.
And so our board is voting on this, right?
Yeah. Second.
Second? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And then just a request a second motion to authorize the district legal counsel and district staff to make changes to form and content as required to draft the amended and restated agreement.
Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And then number 7 might be a little challenging, but it's to adjourn all boards.
I move to adjourn the board.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Move to adjourn Mansfield.
Second. Any discussion? Anybody want to stay? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No motion carries.
Ms. Stebbins, all in favor? Unanimous.
So congratulations to you all, and let's continue with the success of this wonderful facility, and appreciate all your efforts. Thank you very much.